Hi, Peter Charles here, Folk to Fly Fly Fishing, and I thought in this video I'd go through the lines I use when streamer fishing, and more importantly how I employ them, because I don't employ them all the same way. It's not just a case of different densities and going deeper. I do use them with certain guidelines in mind to avoid problems and to get the maximum benefit out of them. So the first one I want to talk about is the Kelly Gloop streamer line, and that's this beastie right here. And that's, let's see if we can angle this so we get the view of the taper. It's very similar to a bass bug taper. It's a floating line. And I do all of my floating streamer fishing with this 6-weight line. And you'll notice I've got a 5-foot poly leader here. If I needed to get the fly down a little bit, and we're talking like this much, we're not talking a lot, I would use a 5-foot poly leader, which gets me below the surface, outwards of 6 inches, depending on the speed and the current flow. High current flows, it could be just an inch. And low current flows, it could be, closer to a foot. This is the line I would use if I want to do any upstream fishing, if I wanted to use my U method, if I wanted to do any dead drifting with streamers. This is a sort of approach I would use. Take that floating line and employ it in a variety of ways. But the thing is, I'm not worried about depth too much. I'm expecting the fish to come up for whatever I'm offering. I'm not expecting to get the fly down to where the fish are. Now, the next one I use is this Beach Intermediate. And unfortunately, this is discontinued. But the key aspect of the Intermediate, it has a clear intermediate head and a floating running line. And that's the key bit. That green that you see here is a floating running line. And it's important in river usage that your running line floats, because if it doesn't, not only does it snag on the bottom and snag on the weeds and all that kind of nonsense, but it also, because it sinks into the water, when you're trying to make a cast, the cast have to pull that running line out of the water, and in the process you're sucking power out of the cast, so you're losing distance. The only time you can get away with an intermediate running line is if you're standing in strong current, and then the current will straighten it out for you. Other than that, it's useless using intermediate running lines. So though this is discontinued, I'm showing you this because you might be able to find something that's similar, which is an intermediate head floating running line. Now, this line is probably the one that I catch most of my fish on. I do a lot of intermediate line fishing, because it's a very effective tool for streamer fishing in average trout rivers and average bass rivers. And if you've seen my video on fishing intermediate lines, you'll know that you can get quite deep with them depending on how you use them. If you can cast them straight out, sort of a 45-degree angle like we normally do, and swing them around, and they'll fish relatively shallow, maybe 6 inches to a foot under, depending on flow rates. But if you cast a little further across stream and use that as a setup cast, with perhaps a mend as it hits the water, and then it sinks and then comes around, so you end up fishing a lot deeper. So you can manage distance quite well with an intermediate line. And as I say, I've caught most of my fish on intermediate lines when I'm fishing streamers. And if I include Cape Cod, I've caught a ton, because I've had 50, 60, 70 fish schoolie days in Cape Cod with an intermediate line. So they can be very, very effective in fishing streamers. The last one is this beastie right here, and it's the Streamer Max line. And it is an interesting line because it has a high density front end, an intermediate belly, and then all the running line is floating. Again, you want that floating running line. So this thing tends to nose down. It's really a triple density line when you think about it. You've got high density tip, it's about 15 feet, I think it is. And then you've got an intermediate belly and a floating running line. And where I use this is in the deeper, faster runs, that the intermediate is just going to struggle to get the fly down to the fish. It's also when I really need to get the fly low. And I will also use it when I have to strip the fly quickly, because when you're stripping, you cause the line to rise. So if I use my intermediate line here and I was stripping it fast, it wouldn't run very deep. So if I need to get the fly down and strip it fast, you're going to be looking more at the Streamer Max, and it works great in that kind of capacity. You'll also hear talking about Spank the Bank. This is the type of line you would use for that, to drop flies if you're in a drift boat and you're going down the river and you're casting to the bank and dropping flies near the bank. And you want to get it down fast because, you know, the boat is moving, the current's moving, you want to get it down fast back, and it's just this repetitive motion towards the bank. And this is the kind of typical line they might use for that job. So these are the three lines I use all of the time. And as I say, I will employ the polyleader on the floater. I don't bother putting the polyleader on the intermediate, though you could, but I wouldn't bother myself. And it's actually counterproductive if you try to put it on this one, because what you'll get is you'll get your fly hanging up, because the polyleader doesn't sink as fast as this thing. So especially the front end of the polyleader. So you're actually creating this kind of a U shape, especially if your fly doesn't sink very well. So as I say, the polyleader is mostly always used with my floater. So that's what I use, the Kelly Gloop streamer line, which is like a bass bug line. So if you have a bass bug line, use it. I've got my beach line intermediate, and to say it's out of, it's no longer made, so you'll need to find something similar. And I have the Streamer Max short. This is the short version. Works like a charm, and these three lines have accounted for a lot of fish. Cheers.